Chapter 701. Mind-Body Connection Realm 2. What do you mean you're not sure I'm going to like it? From the looks of things, I really won't like it. I already didn't like it. Just the look on Noel's face made me not want to do whatever he was trying to suggest. It's not that bad. It's that bad. Noel's brows furrowed. I said it isn't. Sure. Though he tried to make it seem like it wasn't, I knew my brother all too well. Even after a lot of years had passed, I could see when he was lying. Still, it wasn't like I wasn't willing to hear it. Tell me what this method is. I'll consider it after hearing you. It's not much, Noel answered, trying to keep his tone light while he started to explain. Normally, the body grows stronger over time as the mana channels gradually adapt to the flow of mana being used, kind of like building muscle. It's a slow and steady process. That's why it's taking so long for you. Your body is just not there yet. And, the key is to get your body to adapt to said mana. Usually, this can only be arranged with time and maturity, but well. There's another faster and shorter way too. Stop dragging the explanation out. What is it? Overload your body with mana and then use my blood to repair it. Repeat it until your mana channels grow significantly stronger than before. Then, alright, I've heard enough. I cut Noel off before he could finish his words. I pretty much understand what he was trying to imply. I refuse. But, yes, I understand that we don't have much time, but I still won't do it. I was well aware of the state that Noel was in. He was in no state to offer up some of his blood to me. Furthermore, he was also planning on killing the Emperor. Chances were that he was going to fail whatever he was planning on doing if he were to offer up his blood to me. And not only that, I'm tired of breaking down and subjecting myself to an endless amount of pain in order to grow stronger. I know that I'll eventually reach tier 7. It might take several more months, but I'd rather take my time than force it. At the very least, I wasn't going to become stronger like this. Not unless I had no choice. I had a choice. Quote. Feeling the gentle rustling of the grass beneath me and the silence that took over, I looked at Noel, who stood on the opposite end, his clothes fluttering alongside the wind as the two of us stared at each other. He stood like that, his face calm until he lowered his head and smiled. You really did change. He looked somewhat relieved as he looked at me. Taking a step back, he raised both hands. All right, if this is the path you want to take, I won't stop you. If you do ever change your mind, I'll be waiting. I may not have my heart anymore, but there's still plenty of blood left in me. Quote. I'm good. I didn't think I'd ever take him up on the offer. Never say never. All right, stop it. Noel smiled again. At the same time, his head lowered as he seemed to notice something. You picked up the sword again. Sword. Looking down at my hip, I glanced at the sword that was resting on the hilt. Oh, right, I had kept it with me because I was so used to having it with me as Lazarus. No, not really. That's rather surprising. You were quite strong with the sword. I did try to get you a body that was suitable for the sword, but I failed in that aspect. I even tried to improve his talent, and got him obsessed with the sword, but... Noel stopped there, especially given how I was looking at him. What is it? He cocked his head slightly. You're giving me a weird look. It was as if he didn't notice anything wrong with his words at all. Right, it's about time that I asked him. I've always wondered about this. Regarding Julian, are you the father? Julian. Noel blinked, the gears in his mind slowly turning, until my words clicked, and he burst out laughing. Of course not. I had been preparing for quite some time, but I only took over once Aldrich passed away. His body wasn't exactly the strongest. Quote. Oh, I felt a lot more relieved upon hearing his words. But only for a moment. Not that I wouldn't have done it if I had the choice. What? Noel looked at me, his smile seeming extremely thin. In my current state, there's no way I can do anything that you're imagining. But if I had to do it, I would have done it. In fact, I would have probably been able to accomplish much more. However, Julian was the most suitable body for emotive magic. His talent was good enough to serve as a good body. Quote. Oh, I swallowed quietly, feeling the current Noel to be completely different from the warm Noel that had been speaking to me just a few moments prior. If I had to take a guess, then the reason why Julian's mother joined. But of course, I made it so that she would go there. Why else would you think someone like her could become a seat? Noel retained his smile, and I felt my breath pause. Right, I had been wondering that too. How is it possible for Julian's mother to be this strong, yet her sons aren't nearly as talented? While it's true that I've become strong, that's mainly because of the weird system. I used to struggle a lot before that. In that case, is she on our? Oh, no, Noelle cut me off. She's definitely not on our side, but it doesn't matter. I prefer it to be this way. It'll make things easier further down the line when she'll be of use. I see. There were a lot of things that I wanted to say or ask at the moment. However, staring at the current Noelle, I couldn't find it in me to ask any more. I knew that Noelle had changed. I knew that I couldn't expect Noelle to be the same innocent child that he used to be. With everything that he had gone through, this was to be expected. Yeah, it's expected, but even though I knew and understood, I couldn't help but feel sad. This was my fault. It was without a doubt my fault. But when was something not my fault? Covering my face with both hands, I plopped down against the grass and stared at the distant sky above. I'm tired. So tired. Verdant Empire. Swoosh, swoosh. A silver streak flashed through the air, too fast for the eye to follow. Moments later, several large chunks of armor clattered to the ground. Clank, clank. Placing his sword back to his hilt, Leon's gray eyes stared at the dummies on the floor. His brows furrowed slightly at the sight. Still not fast enough. He needed to be faster. Not bad. A deep voice suddenly echoed, snapping Leon out of his thoughts. He turned his head to see a large, burly figure approaching. The man wore heavy armor emblazoned with a massive lion at the center, his long white hair and thick beard making him look rather valiant. Knight Commander. Leon immediately lowered his head to greet the man. He was Albert J. Kennedy, the Knight Commander who served the Emperor, and one of the 4 monarchs of the Verdant Empire. Looking at what you've performed, you seem to be just one step away from reaching the sword assimilation realm. That's pretty good. In fact, that's extremely impressive when considering your age. Thank you. Sword mastery was divided into 5 tiers: Foundation, Sword Resonance, One Heart One Sword, Sword Assimilation, and Sword Sovereignty. Unlike with mind and elemental paths, the body path had different means of growth. While the tiers were the same, what truly separated one body user from another was the degree of mastery in their respective weapon. Be it fist, or anything else. In Leon's case, having reached the 6th tier, he was considered extremely powerful. However, if he were to face someone of the same tier, but had reached the sword assimilation, he'd without a doubt lose. Sword assimilation was the state where the sword and the wielder were in near perfect sync. Movements were instinctual, and reaction time was nearly instant. Leon craved to reach such mastery. But, I'm still far off from reaching the sword assimilation mastery. That's only understandable. I was at least 2 tiers higher than you before I reached it. Albert laughed, patting Leon with his large hand. Feeling the power behind the gentle tap, Leon's face twitched, but he didn't let it show. The Knight Commander had helped him quite a lot recently. He was the main reason why Leon had been able to see massive improvements in his skills. So long as he kept going down this path, Leon was confident in becoming even stronger. I'm sure he's also getting stronger now. Thinking about him, Leon couldn't help but bitterly smile. There was a time when the two of them used to be on the same level. He was just a tiny bit weaker than Julian, but Leon could still keep up with Julian. But ever since the trip to the mirror dimension, Leon realized that Julian had changed a lot. The gap between the two of them had expanded more than ever. That was why Leon didn't decide to stick with Julian even though he could have. Everything he had told Julian was just an excuse. He just needed some time to himself and improve. I'm sure the others are also the same. Raising his head and looking up at the Knight Commander, Leon sighed and lowered his head. Please teach me again. Sensing the silence coming from the Knight Commander, Leon raised his head to see him smiling at him. Eventually, with a laugh, he answered. I wouldn't be here if I didn't want to teach you. Leon smiled back and raised his sword. I'm coming. Good, come. Clank. Sparks flew in all directions. End of Volume 5. Relatively shorter volume. I wanted to go through the power system at the end of the volume since I neglected it quite a bit. Either way, this is the end of the 5th volume, which will lead up to the 6th one, which will be a rather chaotic one. Chapter 702, Death 1. Tick, tick, 10:23 p.m. The area has been cleared. We can proceed with our advancement. Our time is limited. We need to be extremely swift with our operation. It was dead in the night. Russell Tilda. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a pale glow over the forest below. A gentle wind stirred the leaves, whispering through the trees. Deep within the woods, shadowy figures began to stir, emerging one by one as they stared at the path ahead of them. Time was ticking. They needed to move as fast and as swiftly as possible. The eastern perimeter has been cleared. There wasn't much of a resistance. While they moved, voices whispered into their ears. The western perimeter has also been cleared. You can go ahead and move further in. Their forces have been thinned out a lot. This shouldn't be difficult. Understood. The figures gradually picked up their pace. There were 10 of them in total, each belonging to an elite assassination unit. Their presence was thin, and their formation was tight, making sure that they stood approximately a few meters apart from each other. Each one of them was a highly trained operative. Aside from the emperor, the ruling duchies, and the monarchs themselves, there were few targets in the world they couldn't eliminate. Currently, they had one goal: assassinate the head of the Evanus household. He was their current target. The operation was one that had been under preparation for a very long time. No one understood who the real mastermind behind the operation was, but it was mainly a collective of neighboring noble houses. With the Evanus household's recent rise and struggle after swallowing the Rainsel, Kalyak, Mainz, and Hindua territories, they became a prime target for the taking. Of course, such a large operation wouldn't slide with the Megrail household. Hence, they were undertaking the current operation. If Viscount Evanus were to somehow die, it would provide the perfect justification for the other noble houses to move in and claim a piece of his territory. Having already done the splits beforehand, all focus was now on the operation. Slow down. You've reached the outskirts of Vailment. The Evanus household is now ahead of you. Whenever you're ready, you may begin. Upon hearing the voice, the 4 figures stopped. They checked the time. Tick, tick, 10:25 p.m. Their bodies tensed up slightly. Not out of fear, but out of readiness. Normally, the distance between Villemount, Westbourne's main city, and the Evanus estate would take an hour to traverse. But at their current speed, they could cover it in just 3 minutes. You have exactly 10 minutes in order to complete the mission. Make sure you do not go over the time limit. 3 minutes to get there. 5 minutes to complete their task, and 1 minute to escape and leave. Escaping was easier than infiltrating for them. They each had their own means to escape. Are you ready? The bodies of the 10 figures tightened, a powerful pressure coming out of their bodies, their eyes were constricted, and they set their gaze towards the distance. Then, as their bodies started to warm up, the world grew silent. Your 10 minutes start now. May the operation begin. Swoosh. The surrounding greenery rustled as their figures vanished, darting through the distance with astonishing speed. With their speed, they were able to cover the massive gap between Villemount and the household in a matter of minutes. Tick, tick, 10:27 p.m. By the time the second minute clocked in, the estate appeared in the vision of all 10 figures as they came to a stop, quietly evening out their breathing as they all settled their gaze towards the second floor, where they could see the light of the office was still on. The target should be there. I sense several presences within the place, but they're all rather weak. Let's enter quickly. They didn't waste a single second. No, they couldn't waste a single second. By the time their breathing was back to normal, they started moving again, infiltrating the estate as quietly and as swiftly as possible, moving past the few guards and butlers that remained within the estate. By the time they arrived at the office of the Viscount, they actually found that they had more than half a minute to spare. Let's go. Their figures merged with the darkness, dissolving into shadows as they slipped through the narrow gap beneath the door. It was there that they caught sight of a figure standing by the window, slowly unbuttoning his white shirt. The room was extremely silent. It was so quiet that one'd be able to hear a pin drop. Tick, tick, 10:28 p.m. But eventually, the silence was shattered. My brother most likely doesn't like how much I've changed. The figures in the room tensed for a moment, looking at each other in alarm. Could he have sensed them? No, that shouldn't be possible. They were all aware of the Viscount's strength. In fact, even now, they could see he was merely a tier 3. Quote. It's not like I wanted to change. That's the last thing that I wanted to do. It's just that change sometimes is necessary in order to survive. The Viscount's voice grew even softer, his sharp gaze moving away from the window and onto the room. Even then, I tried. I really tried not to show him what I've truly become. But it's harder than I thought. I think I'm too far gone now. There's no coming back for me, but that's fine. He's changed for the better, and that's gratifying to see. As his eyes wandered around the room, they eventually fell on a certain spot. It was the lamp that rested beside one of the sofas around the room. That's why it doesn't matter if I am like this. The shadow of the lamp wiggled, splitting apart in seconds before reforming into 10 different cloaked figures that appeared on each side of Aldrich, stabbing at his body in all directions. Head, neck, heart, stomach. They attacked all of the vitals in one synchronized attack. Spurt. Blood leaked everywhere. 6A. Before one of them could even get their words out, a hand shot straight towards them as their eyes widened and they took a step back, slashing their swords at the hand and severing it directly. Thump. The hand fell onto the ground while the cloaked figures looked at Aldrich, keeping their weapons lodged into his body. And yet, standing in silence, Aldrich stared at his hand. Why is he not falling? What's going on? His abnormal reaction set everyone on edge. It should be soon. Maybe it's. Everyone stopped abruptly. The world turned quiet as all eyes fell on Aldrich, who still stared at his severed arm. Then, a terrifying sight unfolded as fibers burst from the severed area, rapidly intertwining to form a new hand. The sight brought everything to a sudden standstill as the cloaked figures couldn't understand what had happened. How could this doesn't make any sense. Of course it does. Aldrich's calm voice echoed, bringing them out of their thoughts as he reached his hand for the nearest person. Quote! Quote. Immediately, they moved back, slicing at the approaching hand with a pair of daggers. Thump. A familiar scene played out, but the moment of relief vanished quickly as Aldrich's arm continued forward, regenerating mid-motion, grabbing onto the figure's head. Bang! Blood sprayed all over as a figure limply fell onto the floor. The sequence of events occurred in the fraction of a second, and by the time the others had reacted, it was already too late. Attack! Snapping out of it, they all attacked Aldrich at once, slicing at every part of his body. However, despite the onslaught of attacks, Aldrich remained indifferent to it all. Every cut stitched itself as if time rewound. Every wound faded like ink washed from parchment. Every lost limb bloomed anew. What is happening? Quote. How is this happening? Realizing the situation, the people grew horrified. But it was too late. Aldrich was relentless. Even with all the wounds and severed body parts, he continued to slowly and steadily kill each member that attacked him. His calmness and indifference brought chills to the surroundings as Aldrich's eyes grew hazy. Mortem. It was a word derived from Latin, meaning, death. It was a name that Noel had never understood. His powers. It made it so that he himself would never die. He was immortal. There were far more fitting names for him than Mortem. It was surprisingly Emmett who had told him the name was fitting for him. Back then, Noel didn't understand. But after everything that had gone through, he now understood. He wasn't called Mortem because he was immortal. Spurt. Squeezing the head of another cloaked figure and feeling their blood spurt all over his face, Noel's eyes flashed. I do not fear death. He tossed the body to the side while directed his gaze towards another figure. A long sword stabbed at his neck, nearly severing it in two. However, it just stopped before it could, as fibers wove themselves across the severed area, restoring Noel's neck, and in the process, shattering the sword. I have touched death, felt death. Noel's gaze paused on the cloaked figure before reaching forward again. A scream followed. A limb fell, but Noel continued. Nobody could stop him. Spurt. Quote. Defied death. Noel continued to kill. His body was soaked in blood, but he was untouched. They called him monster, but he was no monster. He was just. Quote. Quote. Noel paused, his breathing calm as he closed his eyes and looked around. All that met him was the sight of severed limbs and bodies. Silence. He was the only one left. Quote. I have now become death. Mortem. Chapter 703. Death 2. It all happened incredibly fast. In one moment, I was in my room quietly waiting to go to bed, and in the next moment, I felt powerful fluctuations coming from the second floor of the estate. Noel's office. I dropped whatever I was doing and rushed there. However, what greeted me was an unexpected sight. Quote. What are the chances of you telling me what happened over here? Standing in the center of the office, his clothes spotless and his body untouched, Noel casually glanced around at the corpses strewn across the floor. The sight wasn't a pretty one, with limbs and pieces of flesh lying throughout. Inevitably, an intense smell of blood lingered in the air as I took a step back out of the office. The smell. It's nothing big, Noel casually answered while looking around before bending over one of the corpses and taking out what looked to be a small pocket watch. There was an assassination attempt. I dealt with them. They weren't particularly difficult to deal with. So you say, but looking at the corpses in front of me, I could tell that they all belonged to quite powerful individuals. While I couldn't make a proper estimate, they all seem to be at least around tier 5 and above. My guess is tier 5, but they look highly trained. How did Noel beat them? I looked at Noel and his spotless appearance. While I knew that Noel was by no means weak, he was currently injured. No, he didn't even have a heart. Your strength should be at around tier 3. How in the world did you ma? Just because my power has regressed doesn't mean my body has. The only things that diminished are my mana density and my ability to wield it. Physically, I'm still more than capable of handling people like them. Oh, that did sound like a reasonable argument. I hadn't seen him fight, but the sight before me did prove his point. We don't have much time. Noel suddenly spoke, staring at the pocket watch. Taking into consideration that approximately 4 minutes have passed since the fight started, it looks like we have about 2 to 3 minutes to take action. What was he saying? Yes, I was expecting something like this to happen. I've been waiting for it to happen for quite some time now. Noel quietly walked towards his desk, where he unfolded a map of the entire Evanis territory, pointing towards the outskirts of Westernbourne, our main territory, and where we were currently. In order for the operation to succeed, they infiltrated Westernbourne from all sides. The perimeter of the territory should currently be taken over by the troops of the other noble houses. The moment the assassination is a success, they'll start closing in swiftly, taking over the entire territory in one swoop. Tick, tick, Noel took out the pocket watch again. The moment they receive the confirmation, the first thing they'll do is strike Vailment. The moment they take over Vailment will be the moment that we lose the war. If that's the case, time's up. Noel extended his finger and pressed it onto the top of the pocket watch. Immediately, the ticking stopped, and the surroundings grew quiet. The wind blew through the open window, and Noel smiled as he looked at me. They've now started their attack. Not far off. We've received the signal. Let's start moving. Quick. Thousands of troops moved in at the same time, moving around the forest that surrounded the Westerbourne territory. At the helm of the troops in the western area was the Knight Commander of the Wilshire March. His presence was nothing short of impressive, suppressing everything within his vicinity. Carrying a large broadsword at his back, he was like a tall mountain. All of a sudden, he stopped, and his hand raised. The soldiers behind him stopped. What's going on? Did something happen, Captain? Ignoring the murmurs and whispers coming from behind him, the captain stared ahead, his thick brows furrowing tightly as his black hair, tied in a ponytail, fluttered faintly. Eventually, he turned to his right, where a small and lanky man with a bald head appeared. Strategist, something is wrong. Wrong? What's wrong is there? Confused, the strategist looked at the captain. We're almost at Vailment. The other noble houses are about to arrive there. The operation was successful. Once we take over Vailment, we'll have taken the core of the Evanis household. Everything will come easy after that. That's not what I'm worried about. The captain raised his head and sniffed the air. His face tightened as his eyes narrowed. My instincts are telling me that there is something wrong with the city. I'd rather hold our troops here for now and wait for what happens later. Even if we do end up joining later, it won't matter much. We're still the most powerful group present. The strategist remained silent. However, after a short while, he nodded his head. Understood. We'll follow the captain's orders. Though the strategist personally opposed the idea, he placed his trust in the captain's judgment. There was a reason Marquis Wilshire had chosen him for the role. Captain Albaz was a man of exceptional capability. There had been many instances where his instincts had been correct, and as a result, he managed to save a lot of soldiers. There have been, of course, instances where he had been wrong, but the losses weren't that bad. We'll wait for the next 10 minutes. If nothing happens by then, we'll start moving as well. Checking his pocket watch, the captain closed his eyes and started meditating. The soldiers around him did the same, and the surroundings grew silent. At the same time, the captain turned off the communications with the other noble houses. The breeze swept through, flattening the grass as the world turned quiet, broken only by the steady, synchronized breathing of the soldiers. At exactly the 10th minute, the captain opened his eyes and stood up. The soldiers followed along with his example and moved towards Vailment. What greeted them near the city was a raging ball of fire. Screams and blood. It was a trap, the captain muttered, the fire in the distance reflected within his brown eyes. The assassination attempt failed. This was most likely a scheme set up in advance in order to lure us in. There's a chance that the Evanis household might have been planning for this since the start, and that all the previous news that we've heard about them was false. Slowly turning his head, the captain looked at the strategist. Report all of this to the Marquis. He took a deep breath. Quote. We'll need more troops if we wish to take over the Evanis household. Embers drifted through the air, glowing faintly in my vision. The scent of smoke hung in the air, and the ground crumbled softly beneath my feet as I stepped over the ash that had formed in the aftermath of the situation. I looked around me in a daze. He didn't hold back at all. While I didn't have many memories of Vailment, I did remember it being rather bustling as a result of the gold mine situation. It was filled with people, and it was developing by the day. However, it was completely different now. The place was deserted, and a lot of the buildings were broken or burned to the ground. Quote. I had the citizens evacuated before all of this happened. I replaced them all with soldiers. Walking ahead of me with his hands behind his back, Noel looked at the spectacle before him with not much of an expression. He just seemed indifferent to it all. Eventually, he came to a stop. A figure appeared in front of him, whispering something to him that I couldn't quite make out. In the end, after relaying everything to Noel, the figure moved back as Noel turned his attention towards him. The plan was a partial success. Partial. Quote. We've managed to deal a heavy blow to the core of several households. The troops stationed near their border will now launch their own attack. Oh, though I didn't know the full extent of the forces Noel had gathered, I could sense that their strength was more than enough to handle the households that had launched the attack. But why was he saying that this was a partial success? One of the households managed to notice that this was all a trap. I've sent several troops to close down on them. They will most likely suffer a lot of losses while trying to escape, but they'll still be able to do so. They've also most likely figured out what we've been planning. Someone noticed. My brows furrowed. Thinking about everything that had happened and all of the plans that Noel had set in motion, I found myself rather surprised by this. In fact, I was also somewhat apprehensive. Yes, it's those from the Wilshire March. If I have to take a guess, it's either the strategist or the captain who noticed. They're both quite renowned within the space. In that case, it doesn't matter. Noel shook his head while staring directly at me. This will be something that you'll have to deal with yourself. Me? What sort of? You'll be taking over my position as the head of the household very soon. Huh, I looked at Noel in bafflement. What did he just say? Noel merely turned his head away from me, looking elsewhere with a distant look. Once I've taken care of the Emperor, there will be no more place for me to stay. I've already laid out everything that you'll need to do in my absence. In the meantime, I will have no choice but to leave and look for my heart. Wait, but, I know that you want to help, but the best thing you can do is grow the Evanis household stronger. That's all I need you to do. I've already laid all of the foundations for you to grow. My job is to take care of everything else. A faint smile touched Noel's lips, his eyes catching the glow of a drifting ember as he spoke again. We're close, Emmett, he muttered. Quote. We're very close to achieving our dream. Don't lose sight of the goal. Chapter 704. Central Meeting 1. Listening to Noel's words, I could only close my eyes. Don't lose sight of the goal. At this point, I wasn't even sure about what the goal was. What was the goal? What was I working so hard for? Originally, I had been pushing myself to the limits because I wanted to get back to Noel. But now that he was here, what was my actual goal? Was it to make those who wronged him pay? Was it to defeat the outer beings? Was it to survive, to become the eighth god? What exactly was my goal? I felt somewhat lost. Even worse, Noel was now telling me that he was going to leave and that I was going to take over the Evanis household. Sometimes change is good, but it can also be fatal. You've grown a lot softer, brother. Noel's words whispered into the air as he stood in front of me. What we're fighting for is our freedom. Slowly turning his attention back to me, Noel's eyes met mine. I can see that you're aware of what you must do. However, I also see that you don't really understand why you're doing what you're doing. You've grown complacent, now that you've found me. You've grown comfortable with everything. Noel's words were like arrows, digging right at my chest with each word. If possible, you'd like to live like this. You no longer have the drive that you had before. You're just doing things for the sake of doing them. And that's fine, but, until when can you keep going like this? There will come a day when you'll break. Not because you were too weak, but because you couldn't care enough to stay. With such words, Noel slowly turned away from me and moved ahead into the distance. toward where the other guards were, as he started to give out orders. They all followed his orders without question. He looked so different than the Noel that I knew, and the more I looked at him, the emptier I felt. My goal. What exactly did I truly want? Time moved for no one. Following the swift actions taken by the head of the Evanis household, on the very same night, 4 counties were attacked. Not expecting such a swift and ruthless attack, the Evanis household was able to take over a lot of land. By the time dawn arrived, the news had spread throughout the entire empire. Sudden actions taken by the Evanis household. 3 counties attacked. What is going on? From declining household to sudden dragon. The Evanis household. Several nobles protesting the sudden actions taken by the Evanis household. Will Central step in? News and headlines circulated everywhere about the situation. This is a bit ridiculous. Reading some of them, even I was surprised by some of their titles. The amount of attention that the Evanis household was currently receiving after what had happened the day prior was even greater than the time when Leon and I became the that thing. But I guess this is to be expected. One single Viscount managed to take decisive action against several counts. There was no way the news wouldn't spread. Plus, it was also determined that the household was in decline. This type of reaction should have been expected. But of all the headlines that I saw, the ones that worried me the most were the ones about Central. Will they act or not? Central was the coalition between all the major noble houses. Some of the nobles who had suffered losses belonged there. The Evanis household was also part of Central. In that sense, the situation wouldn't be too bad. However, if they did try to force the matter, then I could see things become troublesome. That, of course, wasn't what worried me the most. Delilah's father is the head of Central. If we're forced to have a hearing with them, then, just the thought was giving me a headache. Groaning, I sat up in my bed while looking around the room. Noel's words still rang loudly in my mind, and even as I mused over them the entire night, I felt lost. I know what I'm doing. I know what I have to do. I also know what I'm doing it for. In that sense, I don't think I'm missing anything. And yet, it also feels like I'm missing something. Pursing my lips, I sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. But that silence merely lasted for a few minutes until I felt my communication device vibrate. Checking the message, which came from Noel, I began to read it slowly. But halfway through, my expression shifted, and by the time I reached the end, I was already cursing under my breath. Shit, the annual Central Gathering will be taking place in a week's time. Given what had recently happened, they will be talking about the incident alongside the involved noble houses. I have other things to do. You will be the one to participate in the event. I will leave the decisions to you during the meeting. Do what you must. Though I had long seen it coming, witnessing it unfold before me made my stomach sink. I tossed the communication device aside and leaned back against the bed. Staring blankly at the ceiling, I slowly raised my hand, letting my eyes settle not on the hand itself, but on the black ring encircling my finger. A thought occurred to me then. Will she be there or not? It had been a month since I had last seen or talked to her. How was she doing? Oh, wait, I suddenly sat up. Since she's probably busy with something, maybe I won't have to worry about my meeting with Central. It's not like her father knows anything. I just have to focus on the task at hand, and everything will be good. I suddenly felt a lot better. Right, he doesn't know. I just have to focus on the task, and everything will be fine. Suddenly feeling a lot more relieved, I calmed down and put my communication device away. Letting out a long breath, I finally managed to relax a little. In that case, I should get ready. I have a couple of days to prepare for what is to come. Twitch, twitch. In the heart of a vast, silent chamber, polished marble stretched endlessly beneath towering white pillars that held the space together. On the cold floor, a figure twitched. Frail, with sunken cheeks and skin stretched too tightly over brittle bones. Quote ellipsis dot. Quite the pitiful sight. A middle-aged man appeared behind the figure, a silver tray balanced carefully in his hands. He looked down at Jackal with no emotion before quietly setting the tray on the floor. As if sensing the middle-aged man, Jackal's body twitched. He seemed to want to say something, but didn't have the energy to say a single thing. The middle-aged man sat down next to Jackal as he focused his attention on the 2 items that were resting on the tray. One was a small and sharp knife, while the other was a black chalice. It may not be the real thing, but it should be enough. The middle-aged man muttered while staring at the chalice. In the end, shifting his attention back towards Jackal, the middle-aged man smiled. Don't worry, things will end very soon. You just have to bear with the pain for a little longer. Besides the two of them, there was no one else within the confines of the enormous room. With meticulous care, the man picked up the knife and polished it with a white cloth. The slow, thoughtful motion continued as he began to speak again, softly, as if confiding something deeply personal. I can sense that you're quite talented. Not many people have a body that is capable of withstanding the blood of a god for so long. The fact that you were able to stay alive for so long is testimony to it. But of course, no matter how talented you are, a fake will never be able to withstand the blood for long. Twitch, twitch. Jackal's body started twitching the moment it heard the words, fake. It was almost as if he was trying to scream, fake. Who was the fake? But this sight only made the middle-aged man smile. Still clinging to that belief, are you? That you were meant for something greater. Twitch. It is true that you were able to absorb the blood, and that you were able to use its power, but it's also true that you've been used. Jackal's body paused for a moment. Staring at him, the middle-aged man's gaze fell on the numerous orbs floating within his body. Primarily, he could see two colors stand out from the rest. Red and purple. His lips pulled slightly. From the start, you were never meant to be the chosen one. You were made to think that you were the chosen one in order to play the perfect pawn for the true successor. Twitch, twitch. The red orb within Jackal's body grew in size as his body twitched more and more, seemingly in protest. As if calling out for his bullshit. But this was no bullshit. He's still alive. The twitching stopped, and the purple orb grew. He let you believe you'd won. That you'd killed him. But he was always one step ahead. He let you carry the burden. Let you draw my attention. Let you burn. Silence. The purple orb grew further, and the middle-aged man's voice lowered. You were the fake from the start. A tool used by the real one. It was now almost a whisper. Your current state is a result of you being a fake. Your body is slowly tearing itself apart, and you're now just a few minutes away from dying. Twitch. You were never meant to survive this. Twitch. You were never meant to be anything. Twitch. And in moments, you'll be nothing. Leaning closer to Jackal, the middle-aged man whispered further. How does it feel to know that in your last moments, your life will be nothing short of pathetic? That you were a mere fake that was used as a pawn for the real one to grow? How do you feel knowing that you were born with the sole purpose of amounting to nothing? A creepy smile blossomed on the middle-aged man's face as he slowly pulled his head away to see the numerous orbs that were fluctuating in front of him. Extending his hand, the orbs wiggled wildly until, swoosh, they all flew onto his mouth as he started to absorb them. By the time he was done, Jackal's body lay motionless on the ground, completely devoid of any thought or emotion. Goodbye. He raised the knife and brought it down. Fake. Chapter 705. Central Meeting 2. Blood spread across the well-polished marble floor, forming a dark, widening pool beneath the motionless figure at its center. Standing above the corpse, Sithras stared at his own reflection. His eyes carried no emotion. No, nothing as he stared at the pooling blood before him. Eventually, his eyes closed, and he gently picked up the dark chalice. Snap. With a snap of his fingers, the blood on the floor rose and flowed into the chalice. A powerful glow enveloped it, and the metal began to heat, pulsing with energy. Sithras brought the chalice down, staring at his own reflection within the chalice. For how long had he been waiting for this moment? He had long lost count. No, it was more like, in all the years he had been alive, he had long lost the concept of time. A long time. This was how long he had waited for this moment. He didn't delay it any further. Seeing the blood in the chalice, Sithras slowly brought it to his lips and took a sip. The raw, metallic taste clung to his tongue, seeping down his throat as a burning sensation spread from the back of his mouth. His face twitched as he drank the blood, but he resisted as the burn at the back of his throat intensified. What followed the burn was a sudden throb of the mind. It was faint at first, but by the time a couple of seconds had passed, the pain grew more prominent and Sithras's usually collected face started to change. Black veins started to protrude from the side of his neck, and his entire body started to tremble. Despite the pain and changes, he remained where he was. He closed his eyes and managed the pain. However, despite his best efforts to endure it, the pain only intensified, growing sharper with each passing second. Sweat began to soak his back, clinging to his skin as his body trembled under the strain. Despite his best efforts to hold in his groan, one inevitably escaped his lips. That started a chain reaction as his eyes snapped open and he wobbled back, the muscles in his body starting to give out. He could feel the blood rejecting him with all its might, smashing against his veins and organs. However, Sithras remained stubborn and kept the blood inside his body, forcing it to fuse with him. Blood seeped from the corner of his mouth as he did so, and then as his teeth clenched tightly, he heard it. Quote, "Your greed knows no bounds, Torin." The voice he hated the most. Slowly turning his head, Torin's gaze fell on the figure standing before him as his entire body trembled. As his lips parted open, he muttered, "Emmet." The Wilshire March was situated on the eastern side of the empire, ranking among the largest territories, second only to the duchies in size. Its position on the large flatlands made it ideal for agriculture, yielding high tax revenues and contributing to its economic strength. As a result, the March was considered one of the most powerful territories in the empire. Yet, its greatest strength was also its vulnerability. Surrounded on both sides by two duchies, the Wilshire March lived under constant pressure. They were an inviting slice of land that the duchies would eagerly claim if given the chance. It was for this reason that they had no choice but to slowly expand. Currently, within the main estate. Quote, "So you're saying that it was all a trap set up by the Viscount?" A soft voice whispered through the confines of the large office. Seated behind a desk, a man with short hair and square glasses looked up. Dressed in a white suit and exuding a scholarly air, his attention locked on the two figures standing before him. Stepping forward, Captain Albus pressed his hand against his chest and lowered his head. "That is indeed what happened. I'm sure you must have already received the reports." Quote, The Marquis merely smiled while looking at the captain. Hidden behind those glasses of his, nobody could tell what he was thinking. An unknown tension rose within the room. One that was shattered by the Marquis, who picked up his pen and started filling in one of the many documents that were in front of him. "I've received news of what happened a little while ago. Or more like, I've been cursed and scolded quite a bit for your inaction. It seems like they think the failure in the operation was due to your inaction." The Marquis chuckled. "I don't blame either of you for the failure. In fact, I applaud you for not falling for the trap. We could have suffered quite a lot of losses had you not chosen to stay back." All in all, the Marquis didn't lose much from this operation. Besides the assassins, who weren't even his but a hired group, the Marquis was still in good shape. The same couldn't be said for the other noble houses. They not only lost several core powers but also a significant portion of their territory following the Evanus household's retaliation. They were swift and precise with their actions, leaving no room for the counties to react. Lost in thought, the Marquis paused, his mind turning to Aldrich Evanus. He recalled everything that had transpired. How effortlessly the man had deceived even him, and everyone within the empire. "I used to think that his son was dead, but now I'm not so sure." News of Julian's death had made its way across several large households. While it wasn't public news, the top noble houses were aware. His death was also one of the main reasons why the Marquis acted. However, looking at things now, he started to doubt whether Viscount Evanus's son was truly dead or not. Just thinking about it made him shudder. What a terrifying man. But despite his fears, a smile graced the Marquis's features. "But it makes it all the fun." This hadn't been the first time the Marquis had met someone like this. He didn't expand his territory to what it was now without encountering his fair share of opponents. Drumming his fingers against the table, the Marquis's gaze eventually fell on the letter in front of him. Central meeting. His fingers paused, and his eyes closed. There was a very specific reason why they had chosen to attack at this very time. It wasn't a coincidence that it happened right before the annual central meeting. Opening his eyes, the Marquis looked towards his strategist and captain. "Start with the preparations. It will be a long week for the two of you. I've already left you a detailed list of everyone that you need to take note of and what might happen during the meeting. I doubt it will be a very productive one. Considering that our household is amongst the newest to join, our political influence is much smaller compared to some counties or even matches. There was only one day left until the meeting, and Noel was currently filling me in on the situation and what and who I needed to look out for. Quote, There will be some that will try to help you, but don't fall for those. Nobody will help you for free. I know that much. I may not be experienced in this stuff, but it wasn't like I was stupid. I understood the basics. Furthermore, the academy wasn't much different in this regard. There was a lot of political nonsense there. Well, at the start, everything died down rather quickly after I beat them up, or Aoife did. Our year was pretty mild now that I think about it. The moment the meeting begins, much of the empire's attention will be drawn to it. Even though they hold power over most of the nobles attending, they still keep a close eye on everyone's movements. That will be the moment I make my move. I held my breath upon hearing his words. Right, this makes sense. It's no wonder he hasn't acted yet. Torin has already begun to absorb your blood. It will take some time for him to fully assimilate into it. In that time, I will try to act as swiftly as possible. I nodded slowly, already familiar with the plan. However, listening to it again, there was something that kept bugging me. What if it's a trap? Noel raised his brow at me. I scratched the side of my cheek before elaborating. I'm not saying that it is a trap, but don't you think that Torin might be aware of what you're planning? You say that he's quite familiar with the two of us, so shouldn't he be aware of the fact that we know he might be trying to absorb my blood? He might know that in the time when he's busy absorbing the blood and can't act, we'll be making a move. Maybe, Noel replied, his face even. I've already considered this possibility. It is very likely that he knows something and suspects our goal. He might even be aware of the fact that we're targeting the Emperor. Then, it still must be done. Noel replied, a soft smile forming on his lips. He is too consumed by lust and power to do anything about it. By the time he absorbs the blood, he'll think that it won't matter what we do. But what if he suspects that he might fail? The fact that we gave him the blood so willingly. It doesn't matter. Noel cut me off, turning his attention towards the window where one could overlook the estate, which was now filled with people, as opposed to how it was before. Whether he is aware of our plans or not, it doesn't matter. The smile on Noel's face grew softer as he slowly stood up from his seat and adjusted his jacket before heading towards the door. I've prepared for this moment for a very long time. I've calculated all the possible scenarios that might occur, including the possibility of Torin understanding what my plan consists of. In the end, I am prepared for everything. Noel stopped by the door, pausing as his hand touched the handle. You were like this before, brother. You had a plan for everything. You're the one I learned this from. Pulling the handle down, he opened the door and took a step out. You shouldn't worry about me. I know I will succeed. What you need to worry about the most is whether you will be able to handle the pressure in the meeting or not. Standing up, I looked at his back. I've handled worse. There will be no issues on my side. That's good. And with such words, Noel stepped out of the room. I'll see you later, brother. Clank. The door closed a moment later, engulfing the entire room in silence. Standing in the silence, and recalling his last words, for some reason, this felt more like a long goodbye than a see you. However, despite knowing this, I didn't stop him. I knew that I couldn't stop him. Chapter 706. Central Meeting 3. The next day. Alright, this isn't too bad. I stared at my reflection. More precisely, at the formal attire I had on. A simple black suit, trimmed with subtle gold embroidery. It wasn't extravagant by any means, yet something about it held a strange, compelling allure. It could just be my face. Julian's face was extremely handsome. To the point where any clothes could fit me without a problem. In that sense, the simple suit was probably the best choice since the clothes didn't need to stand out so much. Yeah, I'm also going to a very important formal meeting. Can't be over the top. I took a deep breath and fixed the clothes. They were perfect and well ironed. There wasn't really a need for me to do any fixing. And yet, maybe here, I should fix this part. I couldn't help but find any little flaw to be glaring. Maybe I should redo the tie. Maybe the knot isn't a good one. I pressed my hand against the head of the tie. Taking another deep breath, I tried my best to calm myself down, but the more I did, the more I seemed to notice flaws with my clothing. What the hell? I was more nervous than I previously anticipated. Of course, it wasn't because of the meeting or anything like that. I couldn't care less about that. It was that, alright, get it together. I clenched my teeth and slapped the sides of my face. Good thing Leon isn't here to see me like this. If he were here, I can only imagine what would happen. My best bet is that he'll laugh at me at first before getting pissed off at how slow I am. Somehow, I was really starting to miss Leon. He was a useless knight, but things were less lonely without him. Aside from Noel, I didn't really have anyone to talk to. It used to be Pebble, but I hadn't seen Pebble since the incident a while back. Everything I tried to call for Pebble, I would just be met with silence. If not for Almighty telling me that everything was okay, I'd already be worrying. There's also Wobbles, but, I honestly have no idea where Wobbles has gone. Wobbles wasn't exactly a will. I couldn't tell where it was. As far as I was aware, it had started roaming around the surroundings, slowly getting fascinated with the world outside of the mirror dimension. Good thing that I still have a coral with me. I could connect with Wobbles at any time so long as I used it. To talk, young master. Just then, the door knocked and I turned my head. The door opened to reveal the face of a maid. The carriage is here. I see. Nodding at the maid, I grabbed a few things off my desk and followed her out of the estate. As I did, a large black carriage greeted me at the entrance. Waiting for me was a middle-aged man with long, graying hair and a neatly kept white mustache. He bowed politely upon seeing me as he opened the door of the carriage a moment later. Young master. Stepping into the carriage, I nodded at him while settling myself down on the nice cushion on the inside. Peering through the window, I tried to look for any sign of Noel. However, regardless of where I looked, he didn't appear. I guess he must have already left. The thought made me feel a little empty, but in the end, I closed my eyes and rested my head against the side of the carriage as it started moving. In a way, I had already seen this coming. Located not far from Bremer, the capital of the empire, Central's main headquarters stood in a more secluded region, tucked away inside a small forest. Despite its remote location, the structure was towering and imposing, rising above the treetops with a gleaming white domed roof and tall pillars flanking its sides, making it hard to miss. We're here. The carriage came to a stop at the entrance of the forest. Coming out of the carriage, I looked around me to notice that there were other carriages parked. Looking around, I noticed a rather grand carriage. It must have arrived at the same time, because just as it came to a halt, a glint of purple hair shimmered in the sunlight. Evelyn stepped out. The moment she stepped out, several eyes immediately fell on her. Not just because of her appearance, but because of the status of her family. The Verlice family had long outgrown their modest Viscount title. Since securing the trade deal with the Kasha, their influence had surged dramatically over the past year. It was only natural that they got a lot of attention. That being said, it wasn't like I wasn't getting a little attention either. I was getting quite a lot of it myself. Oh, as if noticing me, Evelyn stopped and looked at me. Behind her, a man with tall and sharp features appeared. He had a neat beard, well-combed purple hair that matched his violet eyes. He was a man I had seen before. Evelyn's father, Viscount Damien Verlice. Walking up to me, he greeted me with a smile as he looked around. So it seems that Viscount Evanus couldn't make it. Unfortunately not. He's rather busy right now. Haha, I can see that. The Viscount laughed heartily. He's been causing quite the stir recently. I'm not surprised that he sent you here instead of going himself. I'm sure things are going to be somewhat tough for you once we head inside. Right, I was somewhat aware of this. But it didn't particularly matter to me. I had faced worse things. A bunch of arrogant nobles wasn't something that particularly scared me. What did scare me, however? No, let's not think about it. I shuddered just thinking about it. Should we get going? Hearing the Viscount's voice as he pointed toward the forest entrance in the distance, and feeling the weight of so many eyes fixed on us, I couldn't help but agree. The atmosphere had grown uncomfortably tense. We should. I was the first to step forward. At the forest's edge, a narrow footpath revealed itself. Twisted branches reached out to block our way more than once, and rocks scattered across the ground made the path rather annoying to walk. On several occasions, Evelyn tripped on the rocks, forcing a few small curses under her breath. This caused the Viscount to frown on several occasions. Who taught you to speak like that? Why are you swearing? Stop swearing. That's unbecoming of someone of your status. The sight was almost comical. So much so that I nearly laughed out loud on several occasions. Somehow, I held myself back just in time. As expected, Kira isn't really the best of influences. Evelyn looked miserable the entire walk, and it was only once we finally managed to arrive at the main building that she looked reinvigorated. Welcome. Greeting us at the entrance of the building were several servants. They looked normal at first glance, but the moment I caught sight of them, I couldn't help but pause and eye them better. They're very strong. I couldn't quite tell how strong, but it was enough to make me grow serious. They really didn't hold back with the event. Not only were the servants strong, but the building was a lot larger and imposing than I had previously anticipated. Standing by the entrance where several white stairs greeted my sight, I had to crane my neck in order to get a full view of the building. It was massive. May I see your invitations? I pulled out the invitation letter Noel had given me before I arrived and handed it to the servant. He smiled warmly and motioned for me to follow. "Please come in." Nodding, I stepped into the venue. The moment I stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was the pleasant, aromatic scent that hung in the air. The temperature was refreshingly cool, and as I looked around, I saw the space filled with people dressed in elegant formal attire. I had been to many banquets and meetings in the past, but this one felt different than the ones in the past. It felt a lot more formal than the other ones. The people present didn't look as lively or excited to be present. They weren't even talking a lot as they all huddled on their own grounds to talk amongst each other. However, the moment I came in, I noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere as the previous noise died down considerably. For a moment, the surroundings turned quiet. From looks of shock, to the narrowing of eyes, I could see a lot of different reactions from some of the people present. Judging from the faces that a few were making, they probably are the people who were aware of my death. They're probably shocked by how I'm not dead. I couldn't blame them. If I were in their position, I'd also react the same. Tuning out the surroundings, I scanned the room in search of familiar faces. It didn't take long to spot one. A visibly uncomfortable figure, awkwardly adjusting her clothes as her expression twisted with each attempt. "So Kira is also here." As if also noticing me, she stopped for a moment and then frowned. Then, after what felt like a very long time, I saw her open her lips and mumble, "What are you looking at?" I just smiled and looked away. It's her, all right. There were other people whom I was somewhat familiar with. Some from the academy, and others were nobles whom I had met in previous banquets. The overall atmosphere remained tense as I wandered through the room, eventually making my way to the food area. I began sampling some of the dishes they had prepared, grateful at least for the quality of the food. It's definitely good. Looking around, my eyes eventually fell on the sweet area. Stopping for a moment, my eyes fell on the chocolate fountain. For some reason, it looked rather familiar. Well, not surprising. They are all probably made from the same brand. Pushing the thought aside, I reached out to grab another bite, only to pause as a sudden commotion drew my attention. I turned my head toward the source, only to freeze the next moment. There, I watched a figure enter the room, closely trailing another. The soft click of heels echoed through the space as they stepped inside, instantly drawing the attention of everyone present. All noise ceased in that moment as a tangible pressure bore down on everyone present. Staring at the two, I felt my stomach sink as her head slowly turned and our eyes met. As if noticing something, her lips pulled up ever so slightly, and the sinking feeling grew even more pronounced. Sighing to myself, I closed my eyes. Well, shit. Chapter 707. Central Meeting 4. It was only for a brief moment. However, the moment our eyes met, and seeing the subtle pull of her lip, I had a feeling that this meeting wasn't going to be an easy one for me. The fact that she knew I was coming and still said nothing about it makes things even worse. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach as I turned my head away from her. I hope that I'm overthinking things. The noise across the hall was kept to a minimum as all gazes were fixed on the two individuals who had just walked in. As though an invisible pressure had veiled the venue, everyone's faces grew tense. "It appears that everyone is here." Orson spoke, a faint smile touching his lips as he cast a warm glance around. He wore a pristine white suit, sharply tailored to complement his white hair and strikingly well-proportioned features. Despite his age, he appeared no older than 30. But despite his appearance, he didn't lose out to Delilah in terms of presence. His gaze alone was enough to make one feel as though they were currently being squashed by a gigantic boulder. "I know that a lot of you are busy managing your own territories, so I really do appreciate all of you for showing up today. Since I know everyone is busy, I'd like to keep things short and get started with the meeting. I'd like the representative of each household to step forth and come with me to the meeting room. There is a lot that we'll need to discuss." Following his words, Orson gestured towards a distant wooden door. "Please." With another smile, he waited where he was while everyone snapped out of it and finally started moving. The entire time, the place remained quiet, nobody saying a single word as they moved. It was clear that Delilah's and his presence left a lot of the people unsettled. Looking behind me, towards Evelyn and Kira, I saw them both look at me. "You're going to go? I guess you two aren't." I was here as a representative of the Evanis household. There was no one else besides me. The case wasn't the same for them. "Nope. It's a bit of a pity, though. I do know that your father caused quite a stir. I would have loved to see the meeting." Kira muttered while looking a little disappointed. Thinking for a moment, Evelyn also nodded her head. Now that you mention it, that does sound fun. Quote ellipsis dot dot quote. Fun my ass. I was already feeling a headache while thinking about how I'd have to handle those arrogant nobles. Just thinking about it made me want to gag. However, in the end, I didn't have much of a choice and followed everyone into the main room. But just as I walked past Orson and Delilah, I felt a hand grasp my shoulder. Curious, I turned my head to see Orson staring at me. Bah! Thump! My heart nearly leapt out of my chest. What? Shit! Did he figure something out? Could it be that Delilah has told him already? Shit! What do I do? How do I greet him? All sorts of thoughts swam in my mind in that moment. Feeling Orson's gaze, I found myself unable to remain calm. Despite being an emotive mage, I was suddenly finding myself unable to think properly. And in the end, how can I help you, Father In? It really is you. I was shocked when I heard that you were alive, and, Orson paused, and my heart dropped. Shit, I fucked up. What did you just say? Looking behind him, I could see Delilah staring at me, her brow raised. It almost felt as though she was saying, "That's rather bold of you." My face grew hot, but I didn't let it show. If there was one thing that I was good at, it was keeping my poker face. In the end, taking a small breath to calm myself down, I replied. Father is currently not able to attend the meeting. A situation has come up, so I'm here in his place. Oh, I'm well aware of that. With a laugh, Orson patted my shoulder. I'm not surprised that he didn't come. What I'm most surprised by is how you're still alive. I was there at the scene. I saw your body. It still amazes me to see that you're alive. How did you do it? Although his question seemed light, and his smile appeared warm, the moment his eyes locked with mine and he asked the question, I felt an invisible pressure bear down on me, making it more difficult for me to breathe. It was here that I realized. He wasn't just asking me out of curiosity. He was interrogating me. Stop. A soft voice suddenly echoed, cutting through the pressure and tension. Raising his brow, Orson turned back. Del, what's? Everyone is waiting. We should go. Cutting Orson off, Delilah turned her attention towards the door in the distance. By now, all representatives had entered, and it was just the three of us left. Realizing this, Orson took a step back and nodded. You have a point. Fixing his clothes, Orson proceeded to move towards the meeting room. As he did, he spared me a glance. You should come as well. We can talk about it more later. I'm quite curious about your circumstances. Was this another one of your father's plans? He's been catching my interest lately. From the sound of his voice, he looked genuinely interested. The only thing I could offer him, however, was a smile as I prepared to follow him. But just as I took a step forward, a voice whispered into my ear. It's good to see you. I slowly turned my head to see Delilah walking a few steps away from me, her gaze locked on her father's back. From the way she appeared, it almost seemed like she held no interest in me at all. But upon closer look, I could see her slowly inching closer to me with each step. This girl. Opening my mouth, I eventually smiled and shook my head. It's good to see you, too. Despite it being a month since we hadn't seen each other, it felt like it had been a very long time. It was, indeed, good to see her. Delilah nodded faintly before picking up her pace. As she did, she muttered another thing. Don't worry about your father-in-law. Once the meeting ends, I'll hold him back. You can leave as you wish. In that moment, I almost tripped over my own feet as I looked at Delilah. What did she just? By the time I looked up, she had already entered the room, leaving me at a complete loss. Blinking a couple of times, I shook my head in exasperation. She's becoming bolder and bolder. I was slowly starting to become afraid of what she could end up becoming. In the end, however, I didn't have much time to dwell on this. Given that I had been held back, I was now the last person to enter the room, and the moment I stepped into the place, I felt the gazes of everyone present lock onto me. For a moment, my steps nearly faltered. However, I was able to quickly recompose myself as I looked around. The room was relatively small. At the very least, it was a lot smaller compared to the hall from before. In the middle of the room was a massive oval table where everyone was sitting, and looking around, I found an empty seat right next to Viscount Verlice. I calmly walked towards the seat and sat down. Good, it looks like there's no one missing. Orson sat at the head of the table, his face extremely calm in the face of the numerous high-ranking nobles. Drumming his fingers against the table, he began to speak. There are a lot of things that I'd like to address in this meeting. From the recent movements of some of the guilds, to the potential promotion of several members to higher rank noble titles. Today's meeting might end up being a rather long one. As his hand paused, Orson settled his gaze onto me. But before we get into all of that, how about we start with the most important thing? The eyes of everyone present locked onto my direction. Quote ellipsis dot. There's been a recent conflict between several of our members, including one of the newest members, the Evanis Viscounty. How should we handle the conflict? Quote ellipsis dot quote. Noel stared blankly at his hand. His hazel eyes stared deeply at it as his eyes rippled faintly. Under the breeze of the sky, his clothes fluttered, and as he raised his head, he took a glance at the massive palace in the distance. He wasn't very far, but he wasn't very close either. He stood just far enough to not be detected by the numerous sentinels placed all over the palace. Not that it particularly mattered to Noel. He could tell where each and every one of them was placed. It's almost time. He took out his pocket watch and checked the time. He nodded faintly. Then, spurt, he proceeded to cut off his hand. The entire time, his face remained blank, devoid of emotion. It was as if the act itself stirred nothing in him, no pain, no feeling, just empty detachment. Staring at the arm on the floor, and then his severed arm, Noel watched as his own hand started to repair itself. A new hand formed a few moments later. Tapping his foot onto the ground, the other hand started to wiggle. The blood seeping from the hand came to a halt, and the arm began to twitch. Within a few breaths, a shape started to take form, slowly rising, molding itself into a figure that looked exactly like Noel. Or to be more precise, Aldrich. He stood before Noel, his gaze as detached and void as his. Noel stared at his clone for a moment before raising his hand and placing it over its face. His fingers dug in, and with deliberate pressure, he began to mold its features, shifting bone and flesh until the face transformed completely, becoming that of an entirely different person. This should do. Noel nodded, staring at the figure before him. With short black hair, a thin mustache, and a tall stature, he looked identical to the guard captain of the palace. Noel snapped his finger, and the figure moved towards the palace in the distance. Noel remained standing where he was, watching as the figure neared the palace, stopping right at the entrance. Then, bang, a terrifying explosion took place. Bremer shook. Chapter 708. Right of Arms 1. Princess, might I remind you to exercise restraint with your words. Such language is most unbecoming of your station and quite beneath you. Oh, yeah, sure, Aoife mumbled as she took a sip of her tea, visibly uncomfortable in the stiff outfit she'd been made to wear for her etiquette training. Ever since returning from the academy, she had been forced to attend such lessons. She didn't really understand, though. It wasn't like she was that bad. She did swear a couple of times, but those times were mostly in training. What was wrong with swearing anyways? Aoife sighed while taking another sip of her tea and looking past her butler. When is brother coming? He was supposed to be here 10 minutes ago. The prince is presently occupied with important affairs and will arrive when his duties permit. In the meantime, I must ask that you focus on your posture. Your back is leaning forward quite unbecomingly. And, oh dear, princess. Kindly uncross your legs at once. Such behavior is most improper. Fine, fine. Aoife uncrossed her legs and resisted the urge to roll her eyes. After spending so much time at the academy and around Kira and Evelyn, she was beginning to realize just how absurd many of the things she'd been forced to practice truly were. Even the way her butler spoke. Who even spoke like that? Just endure for now. When I get the chance to leave this place, I'll. Boom. A sudden explosion thundered outside the palace, rattling the entire building. The tremor sent tea spilling from the cup in her hands, while several items on the table clattered to the floor. What happened? Aoife rose abruptly, a growing sense of unease settling in her chest as the heavy clank of armor echoed just beyond her door, guards hurrying past, moving toward the source of the explosion. Princess, please remain here. The guards will handle every, princess. As if she'd listened to her butler. Moving away from the table, she rushed for the door and opened it. Clank. Glancing quickly to her left and right, she broke into a run, heading toward the source of the noise. It led her straight to the palace entrance, and the moment she arrived, her steps faltered, and her breath caught in her throat. What? Staring at the gaping hole in the direction of where the entrance was, alongside the guards on the ground, her mind froze for a split second. What happened? What's going on? An attack? It seems like it. Just then, a warm voice filled her ears, prompting Aoife to turn her head. It was there that she saw a sickly pale figure standing next to her, his gaze similarly looking towards the entrance. Brother. Aoife's eyes lit up upon seeing her brother. However, just before she could move towards him, he stopped her. Calm down, Aoife. There are more pressing matters to handle. You stay here, I'll go and check up on father. But, just listen to me for once. Hearing her brother's words, Aoife bit her lips. In the end, alternating her gaze between him and her, she lowered her head and nodded. I understand. Good. Gale finally smiled as he turned his attention towards the chaos. Eventually, he snapped his finger. You lot. Despite his frail, sickly frame, he carried an undeniable air of authority. One so strong it made everyone instinctively straighten their posture. Nodding towards several figures, he gestured with his head before moving deeper into the palace. Come with me, I'll be needing your assistance. The figures followed right behind him as the only thing Aoife could do was stare at their parting backs before quietly pursing her lips. In the end, she took a deep breath and calmed herself down. It's time to grow up, Aoife. Can't always be ignoring other people's words. Aoife knew from everyone that she was a busybody and never listened. If someone told her to do something, she'd usually do the opposite. This time, however, she decided to listen. She was no longer at the academy. It's time to grow up. She mumbled, staring towards her brother's fading figure. It's time to grow up. Tensions ran high in the central meeting room, every eye fixed on the youngest figure seated at the table. Despite the intense scrutiny, he remained poised, his back straight and his expression calm. He wore formal attire, one that accentuated his eye-catching appearance, and deep hazel eyes. Despite being so young, he didn't lose out in terms of presence compared to many people in the room. In fact, he was almost overwhelming to the eyes of some. Something about his gaze, those deep hazel eyes of his, there was something hidden within that caused a certain sense of unease. This is not a war that we started. His words shattered the silence within the room. We are simply responding to the forces that attempted to attack and assassinate the head of the family. In fact, the reason he is not present today is precisely because of that attempt. He's currently at the household, recovering from the injuries he sustained. Pausing, Julian looked around, his eyes squinting slightly as his gaze paused on several individuals. We've lost quite a lot of bullshit. Bang! A fist slammed against the table as a large man with a bald head stood up, the veins protruding from the top of his head as he glared at Julian. Do you truly believe we don't see through this? It was all premeditated. You deliberately baited us with your so-called struggles. How else do you explain the speed and precision of your response? And the Viscount, injured? I call bullshit. There's no way he's hurt. You knew from the very beginning that this was. And it was Julian's turn to cut the man's words, his hazel eyes fixed on him as his lips gently pulled up into a thin smile. Let's say that we did bait you. What does that have to do with anything? You are the ones who attacked. We never attacked. By rule, the moment you attack, we have every right to retaliate. And that's what we did. But that's what. Julian cocked his head. We only wished to remain low profile. The last time we drew attention, several baronies turned on us. Since then, we chose to grow quietly, without standing out, but who would have thought the surrounding houses would become so greedy for our territory? Julian's gaze swept the entire room as he spoke. There was visible contempt in his gaze as he looked around. We stand out, and people attack us. We don't stand out, people attack us. And now, you're telling me that trying to lay low is baiting? Julian turned his gaze towards Orson. What are we supposed to do? The family had joined Central because of all the benefits that it would provide us, but we've yet to receive any benefits from Central. In fact, we only incurred losses by joining. Not only do we pay a monthly fee to stay, but we somehow got attacked by several of its members. Now, for what reason should we stay? The tension in the room reached an all-time high in that moment. What began as an interrogation had quickly shifted. Now, the question hanging in the air was this: what reason was there for the Evanis household to remain in Central at all? Seeing the sudden shift, a certain person in the room smiled. So not only the father, but even the son. Marquis Wilshire adjusted his glasses and turned his attention towards Orson, who slowly turned his attention towards him. The Marquis merely offered up a smile before leaning back on his chair. In the end, tapping his finger against the table, the Marquis opened his mouth. From the sound of it, it does seem you've been wronged. However, do keep in mind, the primary reason the allied noble houses haven't retaliated is that you're part of Central. Membership in Central comes with its own set of indirect protections and privileges. Is that so? Julian raised his brow, fixing his attention on the Marquis. So you're saying that only those of Central will attack me, but those outside won't, because that would make all of Central against them. The Marquis merely smiled, but that smile said it all. I see. Julian smiled back, his deep hazel eyes bearing down on the Marquis. For a brief moment, the room turned completely silent, all eyes fixed on the two figures. Orson watched from the sidelines, his thoughts unknown. But then, I guess that means we're done here. Julian looked around. Since I'm part of Central, and only members of Central can engage in conflict with one another, things should be settled, shouldn't they? I simply retaliated against an attack, and since those I struck back against are also from Central, there shouldn't be an issue. Julian pressed his hands against the table and got ready to leave. But right as he did, the Marquis spoke again. Not quite. Julian paused while staring at the Marquis. We handle conflicts a bit differently here in Central. When disputes arise between member houses and no resolution can be reached through negotiation, we initiate what's known as the right of arms. It's a formal duel between chosen representatives from each side. Instantly, murmurs and whispers filled the place. It had been a very long time since the last right of arms had taken place, and as such, it was naturally a big deal. Each party places something at stake, and the victor claims it all. This not only helps prevent unnecessary bloodshed but also serves as a display of the finest combat prowess each house has to offer. So, the Marquis paused, his smile growing further. What do you say? The voices and whispers in the room fell in that moment, all eyes focused on Julian, who quietly closed his eyes. So this is what they were after in this meeting. Julian was quite ignorant about these matters. He was also surprised by Orson's lack of words throughout the entire interaction. Very clearly, it was their fault. If they wanted to do a right of arms, they should have done it before the situation had spiraled like this. The fact that they only presented it now told him all that he needed to know. At the same time, Julian understood that things weren't so simple. I do think that Orson has the ability to stop all of this, but I have a feeling there's more to it than I'm seeing. Could there be some sort of internal conflict within Central? Is it possible that Orson doesn't have full control of it, but only partially? I'm sure Delilah alone was enough to make everyone in the room submit, but it wouldn't do him any good if he ruled everyone by fear. Julian turned his head and looked at Orson. He was staring back at him, his face showing no sign of emotion. But it was also then that Julian understood. He's trying to use me in order to put everyone in their places so that he won't have to do it himself. He had quite a lot of confidence in me. And well, all right, I nodded while looking at the Marquis. I accept this right. It wouldn't be bad to have my father-in-law owe me one. No, the Evanis household accepts. Chapter 709, Right of Arms 2. The moment I accepted the right, the room fell silent. I could feel the gazes of everyone in the room change. Some looked at me like I was an idiot, others like I had completely lost my mind. In particular, I could see the smile on the Marquis's face slowly rise up. However, it was only for a brief moment as he hid it right after. Pushing his glasses up, he cleared his throat and spoke again. Just so we're clear, you're speaking on behalf of the Evanis household. Correct. I know you're the current representative, but I'd hate for you to make a rash decision simply because of your youth. What? Because of my youth? Taking into account that I was originally 24 before passing away, alongside the 3 years that I had spent here, I was now 27 years old. If we included the memories that belong to my past self, then I was over 1,000 years old. Youth? What youth? No, never mind. This actually doesn't sound quite right. I'd rather be young than old. Keeping my composure, I smiled and nodded my head. Yes, I am speaking on behalf of the Evanis household. We will accept the right of arms. I then turned my attention towards my father-in-law. I'm not quite familiar with how the right works. I'd like to know more about it. Is there a limit to how many people I can send? Their strength and so on? Immediately, my question brought murmurs and whispers throughout. I could see the contempt in several people grow even more pronounced as they mumbled things like, he really doesn't know. Why did he accept if he doesn't know? My God, he really is too young. The smile on the Marquis's face appeared once more, but I paid no attention to any of it as I kept my attention fixed on father-in-law, who calmly raised his hand to stop all the noise in the room. That's a good question. Father-in-law began speaking. This will be dependent on the number of conflicting households. Generally, if a household is fighting against multiple households, it will be granted the ability to send 2 people per household. And can I get people that don't belong to my household to participate? That is allowed, yes. Quote. Okay, I already had several people in mind. Unconsciously, my gaze drifted towards Delilah, but I soon dismissed the thought. That would be rather overkill. Not only that, but it would also defeat the purpose of me trying to curry favor with my father-in-law. He was probably trying to fix the power dynamic within Central without resorting to force. The best way for him to achieve that was to have some other household suppress the other opposing households. In this case, me. Although I'm not sure why he just assumes that I would be on his side once all of this is over, for the sake of the situation, I planned on following along. So, it seems you already have a few people in mind. However, before you contact them, I hope you're aware that if they're part of a household under Central, they'll be automatically obligated to participate as well. This made sense. I nodded. Yes, all right. Father-in-law slowly turned his attention towards the rest, his gaze fixing on several individuals. Taking into consideration that the ones that filed the complaints were you three, I'd saw. About that, a voice suddenly cut through the room, drawing every gaze to the scholarly-looking Marquis. Wearing a thin smile, he calmly raised his hand. I'd also like to participate in this. I'll be joining hands with them. This development wasn't something that shocked me. From the very start, I could tell that the Marquis had been planning something. But for whatever reason, the moment he raised his hand and joined, the entire room grew silent, and the room grew tense. I could even feel a few looks of pity directed my way. Quote. Are you sure? Father-in-law asked, his gaze fixed on the smiling Marquis. I am sure. A brief silence followed right after as the two sides stared at each other. In the end, nodding his head, father-in-law said. In that case, since there were 4 participants from one side, the right will consist of 8 contestants in total. You have until next week to gather and prepare your chosen members. In the meantime, let's talk about what is at stake in the current right. Father-in-law suddenly turned his attention towards me. Given that I'm already aware of what they wish to request, it is your turn to lay out your demands from this right. Quote. Sitting in silence for a short moment, I looked around me. More specifically towards the Marquis and the other noble houses. I was already aware of what demands I needed to make. Noel had already made it clear. And as such, I didn't stay silent for very long. For the 3 counties, I'd like the compensation to be monetary. I'd like the monetary compensation to be equal to their demands in case we lose. I'd originally have asked for land, but Noel was the one who instructed me to choose the monetary route. We already had enough land. There was no need for us to expand any further. What we needed to do was consolidate our current territories before thinking about expanding again. Okay, that is a reasonable demand. If that's just for the 3 counties. Speaking over my father-in-law, I turned my attention towards the Marquis. This time, it was my turn to smile. I have a different plan for the Marquis. The Marquis returned my smile. Quote. From him, I'd just like one person. His knight captain. But his smile merely lasted a few seconds before being completely wiped off. Seeing this, I couldn't help but be secretly impressed. I had been confused by Noel's demand at first, but seeing the Marquis's reaction now, it was clear. The knight captain he mentioned was someone of real competence. Quote. The room fell into a state of silence following my demand. All eyes were now directed towards the Marquis. What was he going to choose? Would he agree, or would he? I accept. Pulling his smile again, the Marquis's eyes squinted as he looked at me. However, I'd also like to change my demands. The Marquis said while turning his attention towards my father-in-law. Instead of what I'd previously asked for, I'd like to change my demand to something else. And what exactly would that be? The Marquis didn't answer and just raised his hand, pointing his finger right at me. I want him. Follow along. Make sure to keep check of the surroundings. Footsteps echoed through the empty corridor as several figures in knight armor followed closely behind Gale, whose face had gone pale, one hand pressed tightly over his mouth. The palace was in chaos, and he could hear noise coming from all over. However, he couldn't care less at the moment. His goal at this very moment was to get to the Emperor and protect him. While it was true that the Emperor himself was strong, and he had several aides under his care, one couldn't be too careful. We're here. Arriving at the Emperor's chambers, Gale stopped and knocked on the large wooden door that greeted his sight. To talk. F.A. His Majesty, it's me. Barely a second after Gale spoke, the chamber doors swung open, revealing a knight with short white hair and piercing blue eyes. He wore gleaming silver armor that caught the light from above, and a sword hung at his waist, swaying slightly with each step. Prince. The guard greeted Gale with a short nod as Gale took a step to the side. I'm not fully aware of the circumstances, but I've brought several guards with me to ensure His Majesty's protection. The guard nodded, looking at the dozen or so guards that were standing behind Gale. In the end, he pointed at 5 of them. You 5 stay outside. The rest can come in. Understood. The guards followed the orders precisely. 5 took their positions by the door, standing tall and alert, while the remaining 5 followed the white-haired knight into the chamber as the doors slowly closed behind them. Gale stepped inside as well, his gaze drifting toward the figure seated calmly at the table positioned before the towering window. One that offered a clear view of the palace garden beyond. He looked calm in spite of the situation, and as Gale moved in, his hand, which was writing something, stopped. Gale. A warm voice drifted across the room as the Emperor slowly turned his head to look at his son. Seeing the pale look on his face, he closed his eyes momentarily before speaking. It's been a while since I've last seen you. How are you doing? I'm doing well. His Majesty. The Emperor nodded, turning his attention towards the 5 guards that were present. Doing a quick scan of them, he looked at Gale again. He is amongst one of these 5. Correct. Gale nodded. And then, swoosh, a flash of silver cut through the air. It happened so quickly that no one had time to react. In the blink of an eye, 5 heads had rolled across the floor. Blood spread across the pristine marble floor, staining it deep red as everyone present turned grim, their expressions hardening as their eyes locked onto the severed heads before them. The room was silent. Nobody made a sound. That was until, twitch, one of the heads twitched. It was just brief, but what followed was a grotesque sight. Tendrils burst from the severed neck, writhing outward across the floor, weaving together to form the outline of a body. Staring at the sight, nobody made a single move. Everyone just watched as a figure slowly came back to life, hands pressed against the floor as he slowly stood up and looked around, his gaze eventually falling on Gale. How did you know? Noel asked, his gaze languid. How could you tell? Gale merely smiled. He didn't see the need to answer. But a certain someone did. Because we were already aware that you were coming. Stepping out of the shadows, it was as if the room had suddenly been bathed in sunlight. A pair of golden eyes gleamed intensely, and golden hair swayed gently in the air. An ethereal, almost inhuman voice echoed through the space, filling the room with an unsettling presence. With both hands behind his back, the figure met Noel's gaze, and Noel came to a sudden realization. I see, he muttered silently, his expression easing a little. That explains quite a lot. A smile pulled at his lips. It was just a smile, but the moment he smiled, a heavy tension settled over the room, drawing every gaze firmly onto Noel. Despite him being the one cornered, for some reason, it felt as though it was the total opposite. And then, he isn't here, so I no longer need to hold back. I no longer. Noel's eyes slowly darkened, shifting into a deep, lifeless gaze that sent a shiver through everyone present. Everyone except Atlas. I no longer need to pretend to be human. Chapter 710. Right of Arms 3. He had lost count of how long he had lived. Thousands of years. Tens of thousands. At some point, it all just turned into a number. Meaningless. He stopped caring long ago, because not a single day had passed in those years when he hadn't wanted to die. From being tortured just so they could harvest his blood, to the cruel irony of being unable to die through it all. It was in such years that Noel forgot what it meant to be human. It was in such years that he became what he was today. Although he hid it well from his brother, his true nature had changed. He felt nothing, no emotion, no attachment. As if the world around him had lost all meaning. He was just there. Standing in silence, Noel turned his attention towards Torrens. Puppet. He had forgotten what this guy's real name was. He stood opposite him, his gold hair swaying slightly as his golden pupils shone brightly within the room. It was as if he were the sun itself. Ah, now I remember. It was his presence that reminded him. Dawn, that's what his title is. You are aware that with your current strength, it is impossible for you to beat me, correct? Dawn's voice quietly echoed throughout the room. It was calm and collected, as though everything was within its control. I've sealed off the entire space. No matter what you attempt, escape is impossible. Every step you took was foreseen by his honor. He anticipated your plan long before you acted, and ordered me to lay the groundwork. All of this was designed to drag you back into the mirror dimension, and return you to your heart. Noel just remained standing while Dawn spoke. He stood in silence. No movement, no nothing. He was just standing. Every second that you spend outside of the mirror dimension should be agonizing for you. This world, it rejects existences like us. The true humans of this earth. For you to remain standing, it is mainly because of your abilities. But even then, those abilities cannot hide pain. The mirror dimension was a prison. It was meant to keep everyone within the dimension from leaving. However, it wasn't impossible for them to leave. However, the moment they did, their entire bodies would start to burn, regardless of how strong they became. In fact, the sense of rejection only heightens with strength. It was for this reason that most opted for clones in order to leave. But even then, clones were just clones. They weren't real. It wasn't the same as truly leaving the mirror dimension with their real bodies. This was why some were desperate to leave. But in Noel's case, he could leave. He was the only god that was capable of leaving the mirror dimension. Not because of his strength, but simply because of his immortality. Burn as he might, he could just heal. This was what made him stand out from the rest. But even his abilities had limits. The pain, the anguish, the suffering that he had to endure just to be present in this world. It was probably far worse than anything he had ever experienced before. The fact that you're still here, and capable of moving, is commendable. Many in your position would have already lost their minds from the pain. Dawn silently muttered while scanning his surroundings. He wasn't just talking for the sake of talking. He was waiting for everything to set up before taking action. He had to make sure that everything was perfect before capturing him. Only then would Cithras be satisfied. Fortunately, Dawn didn't have to wait long. Mere seconds after the words left his mouth, the air around him shifted, and through the office window, a massive dome materialized, enclosing the landscape outside. His lips pulled into a gentle smile. It's done. He focused his attention back on Noel. But the moment he did, the smile wiped off his face as Noel took a step forward. Frowning, Dawn snapped his finger and Noel stopped moving. Noel wasn't very strong. It was easy for Dawn to stop him with a mere snap of his finger, but would things truly be that easy? With a gaze that could only be called detached, Noel slowly turned his head toward Dawn. Though his body was completely bound and immobilized, there wasn't the slightest trace of fear or struggle in his expression. Only a calm, unnerving indifference, as if none of it truly concerned him. Bah, thump, he heard the sudden beat of a heart in his head. This was the beat of his very own heart. Despite it being so far away, he could still hear it in his mind. Slowly, his eyes closed, and bah thump, his heartbeat grew faster. It drummed loudly in his mind. So loudly that all noise around him seemed to fade, and by the time he opened his eyes again, the faces of every individual present in the room besides Dawn had turned pale. Bah thump, their blood stirred, and their mana started to fluctuate uncontrollably. What's going on? What the hell is this? Staring at the sight, Dawn's usually calm expression showed signs of change. However, Noel didn't care. As he heard the beat loud in his mind, he also felt power start to course through his body. A lot of his strength came directly from his heart. The moment he lost his heart, he lost most of his powers. But Noel wasn't just anyone. He was someone who was revered as a god. He was someone who had tapped into the source. Although it came at a heavy price, Noel could tap into the power his heart held, regardless of where it was. Instantly, his mana surged, and faint cracking sounds reverberated throughout. The shackles that tied him down to the spot shattered, and Dawn's expression turned extremely serious as he swiped his hand horizontally, severing Noel's body in half. Thud, but it was useless. Even with his body severed, Noel's legs kept moving forward, tendrils shooting up to create the form of a new body. Dawn's expression darkened. He pressed his hands together, forcing Noel's body to collapse inward, crumbling from the edges like dry ash. But it was useless. Noel kept regenerating. No matter what Dawn hurled at him, he'd continue to regenerate and walk forward. Even when he tried to lock him in place, Dawn realized that he could no longer do it. It wasn't long before Noel had moved several steps, and Dawn closed his eyes and took a deep breath. In truth, he had been holding back a little. If he were to release the full extent of his abilities, he'd destroy the entire palace. That would lead to quite a problematic situation, but it seemed like the situation had escalated to the point where he had no choice but to attack with everything he had. The surroundings stirred in that moment. His golden hair swayed gently in the air as his pupils shone even more brightly. A terrifying pressure erupted from his form, unlike anything that had come before. It surged outward, wrapping itself around the space, pressing down on everything with suffocating force. Most of all, it crashed into Noel, who finally came to a halt, his body frozen under the sheer weight of it. This time, he couldn't free himself from it. Rumble, rumble, the palace shook, and cracks started to form all around the place. One glance was all it took to see it. The palace was straining, its walls groaning under the immense pressure radiating from Dawn. It was clear, the structure wouldn't last much longer. And yet, despite the sudden change in the situation, Noel didn't look particularly bothered. In that moment, raising his head up and fixing his gaze on Dawn, he opened his mouth. "Do it, huh?" Dawn paused, his mind unable to understand Noel's words. But then, spurt, a fountain of blood suddenly sprayed across the surroundings, a head rolling on the floor in the process as Dawn stood frozen, unable to comprehend the situation. Slowly, his head turned back, and that's when he saw it. Quote. Exclamation mark quote. A sickly figure standing behind the Emperor's corpse, sword poised exactly where the Emperor's head had once been. His hand and eyes shook as he stared at the sword in his hand. However, soon his head turned. They fixated on Noel. "I did it." His voice was hoarse, almost trembling. Everyone could clearly see the desperation in his face as he stared at Noel. The thing you promised. The teaching you gave me. You will do it, right? You will fix me, right? Gale dropped the sword in his hand, taking several steps back as the sword clanked against the ground and he stared at his trembling hands. "I can't live like this anymore. It hurts too much. I need you to fix me. I waited until this day like you asked me to, so." Weakly looking at Noel, Gale asked, "Fix me, fix me, please." It was in that very moment that Noel's indifferent face finally showed changes. A smile blossomed on his lips as his dead eyes fixed on Gale. But of course, snap, he snapped his fingers, and Gale's face froze mid-expression, eyes widening in shock just as jagged red spikes burst through his body from within, piercing out in every direction. Thump, his body fell on the floor shortly after that, twitching as he fell to the floor. And just like that, he died. Noel felt no emotion while staring at the corpse before him. He had long lost the ability to feel empathy for anyone who wasn't his brother. This had all been something he had planned for a very long time. All it took was just a little bit of his blood to get him hooked. To get him addicted to the feeling of not suffering constant pain due to the decision his father had made. It's funny what some people would do in order to stop suffering. Noel was all too familiar with the sense of desperation that came with mindless pain. And he took perfect advantage of that. Like some sort of drug addict, he became hooked on his blood. To the point where he couldn't live without it. The blood was the only source that would stop his constant pains. The constant torment of his punishment. And this was the end result. Quote. Slowly, Noel turned his attention towards the stunned Dawn. The smile never left Noel's face as the surroundings turned deathly quiet. Torin may be able to foresee my steps. That I can understand. He's always been smart, but Noel slowly shook his head. No matter how hard they try, a human can't outsee a seer. A quiet laugh slipped from his lips. Quote. And as it turns out, I have a brother who just so happens to be one. The smile soon faded from Noel's lips as his hollow gaze focused on Dawn. My brother didn't turn mad because of his lust for power. My brother turned mad because of what he saw. Noel paused, his finger slowly pressing against his temple. Quote. Everything.